Okay, I need to read to you just a little bit more than what I planned on reading. You know, the texts for Holy Week are broad, they are numerous in the different Gospels, but there's a much bigger story to just reading verses 1 through 11 of chapter 11. So I hope you bear with me. I want to read through verse 25. And is this loud enough? Can you hear me okay? When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away, and they found a colt tied near a door outside in the street, and they were untying it. Some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing? What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them, well, what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus, and they threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. And then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem, and he went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "It is not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations,' is it not? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. Then Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." And Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly, I tell you, if you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and if you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you. So, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Whenever you stand praying, forgive, if you have anything against anyone, so that your Abba Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses." Thus ends the reading of the word. Thanks be to God. from the very beginning of Mark's account of this triumphant entry of Jesus, you know things are going to be different. From the stories that were told by Matthew and by Luke. Matthew's Jesus comes in, making his triumphant entry, and right on the same day cleanses the temple. And in Luke's Gospel, Jesus makes his entrance and he chides the Pharisees. He weeps over Jerusalem and he goes straight in and cleanses the temple on the same day. John's Jesus makes no preparations at all for the day. It's the crowds that go out and greet him and accompany him into the city. And John's crowd is the only crowd waving palm branches. Today, we are among those who enter the city with Mark's Jesus. Much attention has been given by Mark's Jesus to preparing this entrance into the city. Jesus has walked 85 miles from the Sea of Galilee to the crest of the hill called the Mount of Olives, overlooking the city of Jerusalem. Tourists these days have lunch there, and they get to sit on a camel and have their picture taken. The significance of the viewpoint atop the Mount of Olives is that it is from this very spot that Israel believed God's Messiah would enter Jerusalem. Now, Mark's Jesus waits there atop the Mount of Olives while his disciples, at his specific instructions, procure a colt that has never been ridden, the very animal upon which God's divine warrior will be seated according to the prophetic writings of Zechariah in 9:9. Lo, your king comes to you triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey, unquote. There is elaborate staging in this event. Jesus even prepares his disciples to give the correct answer to anyone who asks why they are taking the colt that is not theirs to take. The two disciples then, after taking the colt, removed their own cloaks, and they made a saddle for Jesus to sit on. As if on cue, then others stripped off their cloaks and spread them on the ground in front of Jesus and the colt, and still others had great leafy branches that they put down on the ground, creating a carpet of sorts, like the proverbial red carpet, the carpet that welcomes royalty, the red carpet, the royal treatment. This is well known and has been used for at least 400 years by the time of Jesus. You might wonder, where did the tradition of that royal carpet come from? That proverbial red carpet welcoming the king. Now, I find what I am about to tell you and share with you very, very interesting, and at the same time, I find it very haunting. Aeschylus, the Greek playwright, wrote about such a red carpet in his play Agamemnon, 4 centuries prior to Jesus' carpeted entry into Jerusalem. I have no doubt that Mark knows the story of the famous and mythological Greek king Agamemnon, as did most folks in 1st century Palestine. In the play, Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, prepared the carpet as a way to set the king up to be murdered by her hands or the hands of her lover. The king walks on the carpet, laid out for his triumphant welcome, and is promptly dispatched. Agamemnon says, "I am a mortal, a man. I cannot trample upon these tinted splendors without fear thrown in my path." I will compare Jesus to Agamemnon today as he rides upon the tinted splendors thrown into his path. Mark's Jesus is silent. He makes no speeches as he enters the gates of the city. He makes no response to the crowds. He's preceded by the crowds and followed by the crowds. And Mark tells us in verse 11 that when Jesus arrives at the temple, he looked around, he looked at everything, and as it was already late, he and his disciples left. Wait a minute. Rewind that film. He and the disciples left. The whole purpose of the entry was to make a grand entrance, a memorable appearance at the temple. But Mark tells us it was already late in the day. And so they left. How many of you were taught in high school how to diagram a story? Nobody? Maybe it was so long ago you did. It is more than the beginning, middle, and end. The exposition of a story is when you do the story triangle. Now I'm doing this backwards for your benefit. Doing the story triangle. The exposition is as the story rises. The rising line is the beginning and exposition of the story until it reaches its peak, which is called the climax of the story. And then after the climax of the story, then the story begins to resolve down, down, and it descends in that triangle, that pyramid, and it's called the denouement in French. That's the French word. The denouement of the story. Jesus' arrival too late at the temple in Mark's gospel feels like a denouement of his story, when we were expecting it to be the climax. For me, this is where the tragedy begins. With all of the detailed preparation and the shouts and the acclamations made by those who accompanied Jesus here, they arrive at the temple, and for all intents and purposes, the place is closed. It's deserted. There's no one there to witness his arrival. Is Mark's Jesus crestfallen? Is he disappointed that this elaborate statement goes unnoticed? It's on the following morning that we have some indication of his mood. He's heading into the city, and he's hungry. And seeing a fig tree, he goes over to it to feed his hunger on its figs, but there are none. Mark tells us the reason that the fig bears no fruit. Well, it's not the season for figs. But Mark's Jesus curses the fig tree. May no one ever eat fruit from you again. Whoa, 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 whoa. Our immediate response, that's not very nice. It isn't the season for figs. Your expectations, Jesus, are unrealistic. So when Jesus arrives at the temple, he's already irritable and still hungry. I venture to say, carrying the disappointment of yesterday's arrival. And so now, when he enters the temple, like a madman, he decides to clean house. Lest we decide we ought to participate in the cleansing with Jesus, we need to step back for a moment and realize that we are among the disciples who are not acting with Jesus, who are not helping him tear things up. You and I and the rest of the disciples are standing in the shadows, hiding. Imagine, if you will, someone coming into your sacred space and tearing things up, turning things over in a frenzy, accusing you of turning God's house into something other than what it is meant to be, a house of prayer. The morning after Jesus wrecked the temple, they were on their way back to the temple. I'm sure there were a few disciples who wanted to stay behind and run errands in Bethany, rather than go back to the temple. As they passed by the fig tree, which Jesus had cursed the day before, they saw that it was no longer in leaf, anticipating the day when it would bear fruit. Rather, it was withered to its roots. Peter says, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." I am sure Peter and the rest of the disciples were alarmed yesterday, and I am sure today they are now even more alarmed. They've never seen Jesus behave the way he did yesterday or even the day before. They have only seen him bless people and heal people, and I am sure they are asking themselves what the innocent fig tree did to deserve its curse. It wasn't the tree's fault that it had no fruit on it. It wasn't the time. It's not the season for figs. If I were one of the disciples, I would want to know why Jesus cursed the tree. Instead of an explanation, Jesus talks to them about faith. He talks to his people about prayer and how important it is to be confident in their open and forthright communication with God. Whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive, so that your Father in heaven will forgive your trespasses. The cursed fig tree story precedes and follows the wrecking of the temple. Mark has done this on purpose. The temple is being compared to the fig tree, leafy and productive, in full flower, but it is not bearing fruit. Mark's Jesus sees God's sacred place through the eyes of someone who, it would seem, has never been to the temple before. Mark doesn't mention any such visit in his gospel before this. And Mark's Jesus sees what he imagined to be the epitome of the sacred place, that place that is full of God's presence. And he sees it as actually a thriving business enterprise, complete with a bank to exchange foreign currency and a variety of vendors offering the best unblemished animals for sacrifice. Sinners come here to make their sacrifices to atone for their sins, and the temple provides the convenience of a one-stop shop where the animals for sacrifice can be purchased and turned over to the priest in a timely fashion. Mark's Jesus is presuming to tell the temple It's business. What should we do with this story today? How does this story leap 2,000 years to the present and speak to us? I have to tell you, I think it's a warning. It's a warning about losing sight of our purpose. It's a warning about being automatic in our worship. It is a warning about taking our worship and our sacred space for granted. Hang on tight. The church is a very emotional week for me, and I have to apologize because I'll be teary all week long. The church in the Western world today is just as guilty as the temple was in Jesus' day of becoming legalistic and ritualistic in its practices, so much so that we stop thinking about who God is. Many of us go through the motions of worship with little understanding of our spiritual purpose. We simply do church because we've always done church. The church of the Western world today is just as guilty as the temple was in Jesus' day of becoming legalistic and ritualistic in its practices. So much so that we stop thinking about who God is. Many of us go through the motions of worship with little understanding of our spiritual purpose. We simply do church because we've always done church. We sing the Gloria Patri, insisting that we sing the words that God wrote. That was funny. Oh, yeah. We sing the Gloria Patri and we stand and we pledge allegiance to the cross as if it were a flag. And we insist on singing the words that we think God wrote. We say our affirmations of faith, but we aren't really giving any thought to the words that we say. I had an email from someone the other day who had some proposals about how to make changes in our worship service that would enliven our worship and give it new life. And I must confess to all of you that all I could see were the faces of the folks in the congregation who would criticize the effort and make it and pick it apart, saying it wasn't the way the church is supposed to be done. We have a tendency to have our own way of doing things. We have a tendency to be uncomfortable when people do things that aren't part of our ritual. There are those who have come to visit our church who have held their hands open as if to receive the Spirit of God in prayer. I saw Alex do it this morning. And I was moved to see this little boy with his hands open like this, waiting to receive God while he prayed. I have watched other people who, when they are moved by singing a hymn, reach their hand toward heaven as they sang a hymn. And I am moved by their sense of reaching out to the Holy Spirit. And yet there are those of us who would say, we don't do that here. There are those of us who would say, that's not how United Methodists do things. Oh, my friends, we must be those who pay attention We must look at what Jesus was saying to his disciples when he said, you can't always do it the way you've always done it. You can't be legalistic about your pursuit of God. You must intend in every moment of your pursuit and your journey to be in connection with God, prayerfully and faithfully. That's what Jesus wanted his disciples to know. It's not about business every day. It's not about being a thriving enterprise, which we are. It's about bearing fruit. It may not be the season for figs, but it's gonna be. And we need to be those who bear fruit. We need to be those who open up our eyes and see where we have not been bearing fruit. Gracious God, pour out your spirit of knowing, your spirit of wonder, your spirit of all things possible, and forgive us when we have been automatic in our worship. Gracious God, we pledge our love to you. We pledge our faith to you. We offer ourselves to you. And in this Holy Week, we ask that you will bestow upon us a knowledge like none other we have ever had. In the name of the Christ we pray. Amen.